Machi, but it's more like Maha right now. Just some housekeeping before I get started. Much to the delight of most of you, there will be no dancing during my presentation. Also, I know Vice President and team said they want to keep everything on schedule. I'm due to be finished at 12:15. So that concludes my presentation. I don't have time for questions. I'm here representing CAS. I also work for Willis Towers Watson, but I want to say in advance that anything I say today is my opinion only, not of CAS, of my employer, but they are my opinions, and I'm going to share some things, just my ideas on things. I will generally be presenting an example of a professionalism platform that can be used. It's not the only one to use. I'm not trying to suggest that this is what would apply maybe to your society as you're assembling or augmenting your professionalism platform. It's just an example. I'm not here to say that it's the right thing to do and you must do that, because it's not, it's not. It's just an example, and we can talk about it. Now, you may understand, or may want to know why there's a guy from the U.S. here to talk about professionalism. That for some reason they couldn't find anyone closer than 5,000 miles to come talk about professionalism, but there's a reason. When the call for papers went out in 2019 for the originally scheduled 6AAC, there were two topics under professionalism. There was professionalism issues for developing markets and continuing professional development. How does your association tackle this? Yes. Now, I am on the CAS Committee on Professionalism Education. I do a lot of presentations about professionalism, and I'm very passionate about professionalism. I was raised this way as well, to do the right thing. Have standards, have a code of conduct, and follow it. And what that does, I believe, is if your association has a platform with teeth in it as well, because actuaries here in North America are bound to the code of conduct and to the standards of practice, it lends credence to not only your client for whom you're doing work, or your principal, but it also elevates, I believe, in the eyes of regulators and the industry at large, that you are a learned body. Yes, you have your exams, and not every association is an exam-giving association, but by having a professionalism standards, it sort of gives credence to your designation and your association. So professionalism is always in my head. I'm looking at things about doing the right thing. But the second reason I'm here, and I actually decided to combine those two topics, is, and I'll be brief about this. About 15 years ago, an actuarial colleague of mine, he and his wife retired, and they came to Africa as missionaries. I'll just mention the name. I don't work for this association. I'm not here to promote them, but it was for the Rafiki Foundation. And he was in Malawi, got transferred to Kenya. When he was in Kenya, I visited him, and I asked if I could maybe help out with the students, with math. So I was there for several weeks, and I'd go from grade 1 to grade 12 in the same day, and I had to, it's like, phase shifts of sine curves. How do I do that? I was trying to remember it. But it was just a wonderful experience. The kids were amazing. And then fast forward a few more years, and I started coming to Ghana here. So not only is this not my first trip to the continent, or my first trip to Ghana, it's actually not my first trip to Ghana this year. I was here back in April at the Rafiki School, about 30 kilometers north of here. And the students just wonderful, and their enthusiasm, and they're African students, so they're all very respectful. They're just wonderful children. And I'm thinking, I'd like them to have every opportunity in life that the child next door to where I live back in America lives. So, and I met Fifi Aplima. Stand up, Fifi. He was a graduate of the school, the Rafiki School in Ghana. And they introduced me to him because he was an actuarial student at UPSA. Actually, he knows more people here than I do. He knows Dr. Essel and a few other people. But I met Fifi through the school, and I've been a little bit, I can't take credit for his becoming an actuary, but he was an actuarial student. I said, well, that's great, But again, I would hope that in the future, Fifi is not the exception, but the rule of a student in Africa who takes on actuarial science and has every opportunity to do so. So, very bright, very respectful young man. He's in his year of national service. Any employers? I can vouch for the guy. Okay, enough of my commercials. So, because of my association with the children and tutoring and just loving coming to this continent, that's in my head. I mean, that's in my heart. So professionalism is in my head, but creating opportunities for students here is in my heart. So when they were advertising for speakers and papers on professionalism, I immediately had to do that. So here we are several years later, and I'm here to talk about a topic I love in a place that I really love. So I'm going to go through the slides. So we did the introduction, we did the background. Peter Royak, can't really dance. So these are just the general topics we're going to be discussing. And if you just move to the next slide. Yeah, so I pulled this wording from somewhere. System of professional education supplemented by a lifetime of continuing professional education. And that's the key we're going to focus on today, continuing education.
Recording in progress.
Create a lifetime career for students on the continent. Again, that's really where I'm coming from. So that's why I also want to say I'm here. These are my opinions only. And then maintenance and governance of this system should be performed by the same actuaries for whom the system applies. Okay, thank you. We actually, on day one, we had there was the teachers conference, which was very, very good, and there was a lot of lively discussion there. And one of the things that I said is, and we know that you just can't cut and paste or copy paste what I'm going to say and put in your society, because there are specific rules, there's nuances, there's different insurance products, different insurance markets, different laws. They really have to be tailored to the local community. So that's why I said they need to be made. You can copy, you can mimic some of the stuff I'm saying today if you want. That's fine. It doesn't bother me if you steal it. No, it's not steal it, but use it as a framework. But of course, they always have to be tailored to your specific situation. And it's very important when I say lasting opportunities is that the actuaries on the ground in your society need to be the maintainers, the augmenters, and be the ones that think about the discipline or the counseling. So it really has to be run by the actuaries on the ground here that are subject to the rules and will be counseling other people. I just find that very important. It shouldn't be, okay, Yvonne, I didn't say this. The CAS or anyone shouldn't be telling you how to do your professionalism. It shouldn't be run from North America. It should be run from your individual country. So, right? I think the other day, Kwame Nkrumah was brought up about this similar kind of topic, but I feel the same way about that. So, all right. So again, continuing education, lifetime of opportunity, and monitored and run by the people in the country. Because there's 54 different sovereign nations here. 54 different sets of rules. I mean, I know that like Nigeria and Ghana can't even get together to figure out how to make jollof rice. I mean, I hear there's two recipes and each one says there's the best. If you can't agree on rice, you're certainly not going to agree on professionalism. So, but anyway, and no comment as to which one is better. I plead the fifth on that one. So, all right. Now we know, and we've had a lot of sessions here that talk about evolving role of the actuaries. Next slide, please. It's not just, when I was a young man, sound like my parents, it was insurance risk. But now we're talking about, there's data science, Jesse's going to be talking about InsurTech, there's AI, predictive modeling, actuaries in more demand all across the globe. And government, I said government and insurance and financial markets should understand the necessity of actuaries. You know, they're not just working in insurance any longer. And we want them to appreciate our knowledge base. And the actuarial profession is relative to, say, North America, or certainly in Europe, is in its earlier stage. So the rate of change on the continent here in what's happening is even more rapid. So next slide, please. Now, I had made this presentation 2 years ago before I came, and I was mentioned to me by someone then that even in Africa, there's delivery of products by text message. I mean, there's innovation is coming from the continent, and I think that's great. Try to be ahead of the curve. You have expertise to share with the world. Next slide. Like I said here, I think it requires a strong base of professionalism, standards, and requirements. And I'm sure your associations have some standards. I'm going to talk about the IAA, what they're doing in terms of having model standards, and just mention what my association is doing. I'm not presenting this as what you must do, but take a look at what I'm suggesting. Take a look at what the IAA has to offer. If you're already not a member, a full member, or an associate member. But I think it's important for all our societies, large and small, to come up with a really nice basis of professionalism. If you already don't have one, if you have one already, that's fine. So, next slide, please. All right, and now you lifted this, and it's something I said earlier. It gives the public, industry, and government agencies confidence that credentialed actuary is well performed and well trained, and it's the continuing education that is very important, because if the industry, if regulators know you're continuously being educated and kept up to date, that inspires further confidence in what we do. Next slide. All right, and these are I made up these equations, so if they don't make sense, blame me. But I just want to work my way up. So we all had a job, or most of us have a job as actuaries. So. But you take exams, and you have a designation all of a sudden. Now you have a designation. If you have professionalism standards on top of that, like we're going to talk, I call that's a profession. If you add continuing education on top of that, it's a professional career. Again, these are my equations, the ROIC equations. So building on all this is great. Point development, various terms. There's 54 sovereign nations. There's 2 types of jollof rice. But as Neil was saying the other day, you can't cut and paste. There's no off-the-shelf solution for this. There's a basis that would be common to everyone in the room, from New Jersey in the States to someone in Lesotho, anywhere. But yeah, there's got to be some modifications made. Next slide, please. I'll go through these hopefully quickly. Yeah, there's a lot of commonality across borders. Talk about the presentation before from Accurate, talked about credibility. That's something we all do. Trend, something we all do. There's a level that we all could agree on that does get supplemented on top. And then continuing education, I say, is very critical. Next slide, please. All right, so in North America, and for my association, there's 3 levels, I would say. There's standards, counseling discipline, and continuing education. So standards, they govern the conduct of the actuary, and then standards of practice and principles, and they're binding upon the actuary. Next slide. And examples of the standards, like written documents. There's a code of conduct that is shared among all the American Academy of Actuaries promulgates them. So they apply to all the societies, I believe, in North America that subscribe to it. Statements of principle, standards of practice. All right, and I said, and again, the underlined statements here for the American Academy of Actuaries Code of Conduct. High standards of conduct support the actuarial profession in fulfilling its responsibility to the public and an actuary who commits material violations, provision of the code, is subject to counseling and discipline. So it's really the basis of all professionalism is on top of the code of conduct. And these are the sample topics of the code of conduct, everything from integrity to advertising to how to use or not use your titles and designation. Very specific on those topics, but broad. They could apply to anyone doing actuarial work. There's nothing in there that's strictly North American, strictly general or non-general insurance. Statements of principles. They talk about specific topics: rate making, reserving, valuation, etc. And it's broad. It doesn't constrain you, but it gives you some guidance, let's say, when you're performing that broader topic. However, two of them have been repealed. Next slide, please. Rate making actually was repealed and reinstated, but they're less universally applicable than the code, though. But it gives you sort of high-level guidance on how to perform that specific function. But I think more important and more widely followed are standards of practice, the ASOPs. Again, the American Academy, Actuarial Standards Board of the American Academy promulgates these standards in North America, and they apply to life, health, pension, and then general. And when the general here, I don't mean necessarily general insurance, but generally to all actuaries. For example, and these are some of the P&C insurance, well, ones that are used by P&C but apply all the place, like data quality is a really big one. That's ASOP 23. So you read through them. They have definitions. They talk about documentation of your process, do's and don'ts when you're talking about data quality, when you're talking about trending, when you're talking about expert testimony. So the ASOPs, as we call them, used across North America by all actuaries, they're also important as the sort of the third part of, as I say, standards. So next slide, please. Okay, and here's where you can find out about them. No need to talk about that. I also mentioned the IAA. Carla Zuniga helped me with a lot of anything for the IAA I talk about today. But look at these. I mean, again, if you're already an IAA member, I'm sure you're subject to these. But adopt them. Feel free to look at whatever we're doing in North America to supplement. Again, it may not work. You may already do something, but maybe there's something in there that says, that's something we didn't think about. Or if you see something there that maybe isn't on there, you can, let me or let Yvonne know that, you really should consider an ASOP on this topic. So again, I'm not saying this list is not necessarily exhaustive, but take a look at it. I mean, maybe a topic, you might want to address in your standards. And again, Yvonne, don't listen to this. I don't care if you copy it word for word. It doesn't bother me at all. But again, with modifications that apply to your local society and to your national rules, laws, regulations. Next slide, please. Counseling and discipline. Actuaries, because of the standards of practice, the code of conduct, are subject to counseling and discipline. But it's really set up as more of counseling. If you see a conflict, you think something is a conflict, you feel it, in your head when you're working on something, contact, and we have the ABCD, Actuarial Board, Counseling and Discipline. Thank you. Again, it's really there more for counseling. If they need to discipline you, they do. And there's a rogues gallery somewhere of the violators. Take a look at it sometime. It's really interesting. Next slide. Okay. Continuing education. Now, we have the offerings of what is considered continuing ed, and then we have annual requirements. I'm sure every society has annual requirements. Okay. For the CAS, again, just mentioning it because that's what I know. This is not an advertisement whatsoever. These are sources of continuing ed. Anything from course on professionalism that is required to get your CAS designation. You have meetings. You have seminars. You have special interest seminars. Regional affiliates. There's all these different areas for where continuing ed is available. Now, I realize that especially, the Ghana Society run by the great President Tego here is well established. Smaller societies, may find it difficult to have an exhaustive list of continuing education. So I'm going to talk later, and I've mentioned to some people over the past couple of days, think about collaborating with your fellow societies. I mean, actuaries love to share. And I was talking to Mia this morning. Actuaries will tell you everything. I said, if you go to a soft drink convention, the person from Pepsi and the person from Coca-Cola aren't going to be sharing trade secrets to one another. But actuaries, they come up with a new way of doing something, a new formula or an issue they have. They're more than happy to share them at meetings, etc. So, it might be a good opportunity for different societies here to share. Next slide. In the U.S., the qualification standards are 30 hours a year. 3 must be professionalism, and that's a minimum of 3. I tell people that you can take all 30 as professionalism, and you're doing yourself a favor. Anyway, 1 is bias topics, and then 6 must be organized activities. Okay, we can go on. So you've got a code of conduct, statements of principle, standards of practice. Many societies already have these, and I mentioned the IAA, the American Academy. Actuaries like to share. Next slide, please. Applicability for local actuarial societies. You have those principles and standards of practice. Standards of practice are a little bit more specific, but they would be easily adaptable or copied or modified for your local society. Next slide. Counseling and discipline, it may be a human resource issue, but again, I'm here more focused on continuing ed today. Next slide. It's much easier to establish the requirements than the avenues to fulfill them. You need to keep updating, adding material, and you need distribution channels. Next slide. And this is really the crux of my talk on professionalism. It may be the biggest issue for developing actuarial societies because that list of offerings. Next slide. IAA further helps in this regard, and President Harris, please tell me if I'm misspeaking, misrepresenting what it's not my intention. They have international actuarial standards of practice, and that's for members and associate members, full members and associate members. That's a really good platform, take a look at what they're, if you're not already subject to it, if you're not currently a member, and I'm saying there's no reason why you shouldn't be, right? And then there's the Advice and Assistance Committee, and the different stages of development. Next slide, please. And there's the IAA Secretariat, international standards of practice that are substantially encourages member associations to have a standards of practice that are pretty much consistent with those. Next slide, please. Okay. Encouraging member organizations to adopt these. Non-member organizations, as I said, could follow along. And again, I hearken back to having standards and continuing education just really elevates our profession everywhere. I mean, I obviously want to make sure that the next Fifi and any other student in the whole continent has the opportunities, has the avenues to have a career and lifetime employment. I'd love everyone who wants to be an actuary to be an actuary. And even some people that don't want to be an actuary should be an actuary. The Advice and Assistance Committee, it helps the local associations with the regulators and move toward the next stage of development. Okay, so then I think I have some information on those. Next slide, please. Okay, the obstacles and challenges, geography. I would imagine that in Ghana, most of your actuaries in Accra. Perhaps in South Africa, some in Joburg, maybe some in Cape Town. Again, you have a well-established society there, but especially before COVID, when doing things remotely wasn't the norm. I mean, if you have several several centers of actuaries in your country, it may be tougher to get together. Human resources, as I said earlier, who will be updating and offering the continuing ed? And then connectivity, make sure there's connectivity where you practice if you are doing online things. Next slide. I hope I'm not taking up too much time. All right. Take baby steps. Don't panic. There's plenty of examples out there. Review and establish what the IA offers, as I mentioned here. They're a good basis, a great basis. Share and trade. Again, we were discussing this the other day. There's a base level, and I'm suggesting, is this an idea I have? The continuing ed material, English-speaking countries, French-speaking countries, Arabic-speaking countries. There's a base level of professionalism that apply to everyone. So perhaps there could be some sharing. Okay, here's some continuing education material that you feel free to use. I will have to augment it with what I know or what is specific to the country. But I'm just suggesting that perhaps we can do some sharing. Actuaries like to share. Use the above coalition platform, as I said earlier. Those societies more established assist others, and then contact the IAA, and they can put you in contact with others who have done so. And I have Carla Zuniga Cortez allowed me to use her email address, so feel free to reach out. Benefit is a platform that's built to last. Actuaries recognized as learned principal professionals. The growth of insurance and financial systems, which increases employment for actuaries, which creates career opportunities for students living across Africa. Now, before I finish, again, that education session, the teachers' forum we had the other day was wonderful, and a lot of stuff was talked about. And it was talking about supply and demand for actuaries across Africa. And I know Mr. Robinson said, well, in North America, you have to have an actuary sign your opinion, which creates opportunities for local actuaries. Now in Canada, and then Professor Dr. Essel mentioned how a lot of times in Africa, maybe just in Ghana, you're farming out a lot of this to other actuaries in other locations. I know in Canada, my previous company had to have their opinion signed by a Canadian actuary. So again, I'm not here to say someone should, go to Parliament and say, we must do this, but, that would create opportunities for your local actuaries, and I know some Ghanaian actuaries in the States, and that would create some opportunities there. So again, please, my suggestion, no one else told me to say this. I'm not trying to sell anybody anything, but again, it's really professionalism and doing the right thing is in my head, but the students here on this continent and opportunities for them are in my heart. So I think I've used up all my time, so thank you very much. I'm sorry if I went over it. I'm just very passionate about this. So, okay. So there will be no time for questions or dancing. So. Oh, we take questions. Does anyone have any questions? I mean, these are just suggestions. Yes, sir, there in the white shirt. Hey, Jesse. Yeah.
Thank you, Peter. That was a very useful conversation, presentation.
Nothing to trip me up, Jesse. I know you, okay?
So, Peter, as professionals, our loyalty is to the truth. We should always be courageous to follow where the facts lead.
Right.
Do you have any advice or best practices for how maturing actuarial societies in Africa can impart to their professional members this loyalty to the truth and the courage to respectfully express their truthful opinions, even if to power?
It's a very good question, and that yes, it's an actuarial question. It's also a moral question. Again, there is a code of conduct, and if your society has a code of conduct, you should be abiding by it. So if shouldn't say this. If that's not enough for you and you're still going to be dishonest or cheating or something, I don't know who, only God can save you at that point. But yeah, I mean, it's teaching ethics. I mean, we in North America, they make sure that you have continuing education, that you go through this course on professionalism and you get it constantly, but and yeah, please, easy for Jesse or myself to say, if you see something that just isn't right and it's against your moral compass, I mean, you should try to have the presence of mind to speak up about it. Because I've never done this before, but I've heard it said that it just creates more and more problems. The more the lies and the dishonesty build upon each other. So, yeah, it's just try to do the right thing. So it's not really. I don't have a solution to your question, Jesse, but it was a good question. So anyway, yes, President Harris.
Thanks so much, Peter, and I really appreciate your passion on this important topic. I guess the important thing for me about professionalism is it's kind of on the shoulders of those who've gone before us that we build our careers, right? So it's this professional conduct that underpins the value of actuarial advice. And I guess to Jesse's comment, the fact that stakeholders rely on us is because they can trust the advice that we're providing. So of course, any kind of professional standard or code of conduct is only useful if it's relevant. If it's a piece of paper or a booklet gathering dust, it's of no use. It needs to be like a manual that is sitting there beside you and is useful. Not just in terms of preserving our reputation, but useful in terms of guiding you when you are facing those moral and ethical challenges. So it is a balance about capturing the principles, which I think the reference points that that various organizations have, including the IAA, where those model standards are not binding on anyone. They're really there as a reference point for principles, but also something that is really locally relevant as well. So I think that's how you will get your members to embrace it, if they see that it's valuable. But unfortunately, there's also the element of discipline that has to go with it. So there needs to be some kind of consequence if it's breached. So those things kind of do go hand in hand, I think, as you have said. Thank you.
And just to add to what President Harris says is, we stand on the shoulders of those that came before us in terms of how they developed this, and we constantly update them and make them more relevant, but also think that the actuary of the future will be standing on our shoulders. So it encourages us to keep things updated, keep things due, and for us to do the right thing, because we're the torchbearers now for this profession that's going to be here long after we're gone. It was here before we were here. So again, correct that we stand on the shoulders of those who preceded us, and the ones after. I keep pointing to Fifi, young man. He'll stand on our shoulders, and his generation. So anyway, thank you so much. And yes, Professor Tago, President Tago.
Just to chip in, this Actuarial Society of Ghana, we have a code of conduct. And one of the ways we try to trap our professionals to be engaged is that at every seminar we organize, at least we attach professionalism topic.
Very good.
So you can't escape.
Right.
Just as what we just done.
Right.
So that at least you keep being guided.
Yes.
By those conducts that we're supposed to follow. Right. So that's one of the areas we look at a lot. And when it comes to practice, you realize that ethics runs through every profession. Yes. So your reputation as an actuary is also at stake. Right. And whatever you do out there affects the rest of us.
Exactly.
And so
Not just you, you're right.
we keep telling our people, keep that in mind.
Right.
And so that's the way we do it here.
And that is wonderful to keep the continuing, keep reminding people of professionalism. Yes, Yvonne.
Yeah, thank you so much, Peter. And I guess you're probably getting more comments than questions because I guess professionalism, it's a discussion, right? It's not really one person talking. But I really like the point that you were making about the counseling. So I think around Africa, African associations, you know, we have a lot going on. We have a lot of other really important things we're trying to deal with. But I think I would also try and encourage people to start like moving in that direction. I'm very glad to hear that as Actuarial Society of Ghana has a code of professionalism. I remember Nigeria were also working on one. But I think it would be nice, I know this probably happens informally, but it would be nice if we can also start trying as organizations to start creating that culture of having a central, you know, some sort of counseling vehicle or, you know, something where people can all go to and have that. And that might even come from at an Africa-wide level. I don't know, you know, but I think that's something that we should start thinking about so that we can also reinforce this a bit more.
Well, thank you for that comment. Any?
Hello.
Yes.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
I'm actually from the academia, so I'm going to ask a question that is personalized from where I'm from.
That's fine.
So I believe you mentioned something about how it's not enough to just copy frameworks, policies, and all that, because it works somewhere else, and just try and force it on Africa, because, you know, there's a saying Einstein said, he said, if you judge a fish's ability by his ability, if you judge a fish's performance by his ability to climb a tree, to live his entire life thinking that he's stupid, you know, so it's not enough to just carry something and come here. So you mentioned something about actuaries in Africa needs to play a role in, you know, developing professionalisms and frameworks and all that. So I have a question. Does the, thank God everybody's duly represented here, CAS, IFOA, and SOA, and the IA. So I don't know if you guys have like, should I say grants that people like us in the academia can access so that we can, if we carry out more research in developing, you know, frameworks and policies that can be tailored to our own unique differences. Thank you.
I think he mentioned that, you know, our grants offered to do local research to augment, you know, any broad standards. I can't speak for this for CAS. Can a board member speak for CAS?
Yes, I'll try. So the CAS does have a research budget. Now the thing I don't actually know, which I will find out, is whether that's limited a lot. What I found, and I think I mentioned this at the teachers' conference, is there is money to do things, but a lot of it gets limited in geography to North America. So like there's scholarships for students, but you have to be in a North American university. But I did mention the CAS Trust Scholarship, which I noticed that is for anyone worldwide. But I will look into that to see if it is limited in geography or not. And the reason a lot of them are, it's just where the funding is coming from as well. Like they intended for that. But now that we're getting more interest, and I do encourage you to make sure that you have your interest be heard, right? So, you know, I mentioned like people, more students in Africa applying for things. If people start seeing that come through, they will notice. Like a lot of times they're just hearing it from me and they might think, oh, Yvonne's just talking. You know, so if that interest is shown and they will see the data that the interest is being shown, people will take me and will take us more seriously, right? So I will look into that for you to see if that's limited or not in geography. But I mean, it's a good point, and I think it's something that we should work on trying to expand in the future.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
John Robinson, who I quoted earlier.
Thank you very much. My name is John Robinson. I'm the president-elect of the Society of Actuaries. At the risk of seeming like we're in competition, the SOA has an extensive research capability, just in general. And it actually became its own entity recently. We call it the SOA Research Institute. So I actually serve on 2 boards, one for the SOA and one for the SOA Research Institute. And in the past, it has tended to be, the research that has been done has tended to be research in support of what actuaries are doing, sort of in a rather narrow sense. But more recently, we've expanded it to include topics of sort of social, more broad social importance. So I would say, in addition to checking with the CAS, you might also check with the SOA and see, you know, which of us meets your particular need better.
Yeah, and please, I was in no way trying to, by not mentioning it, to say it wasn't relevant.
Oh, no,
I was just teaching, I was just working on what I know. So, no, and again, the
Ivana,
SOA could have similar
Ivana and I
things as well.
campaigned together at the same time, so there's nothing going on here.
Thank you so much, Peter. A quick announcement. All those who have paid or are interested in taking part of the Cape Coast tour should confirm their participation at the registration desk. Thank you. Next on our program is informal sector pensions in Africa, regulatory and technical challenges. Please welcome Mr. Amate Vondi to do us the honors. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, let me thank the organizers of this Congress for choosing Ghana for this purpose. And I hope you've all had a good taste of the Ghanaian hospitality. Secondly, the topic that you've chosen for me to speak on is something that interests us a lot in our part of the world, but generally in the developing countries, and in Africa in particular. And I think that we very much welcome a lot of ideas and suggestions that will enhance pensions coverage to the non-wage sector of our active workforce. Next slide, please. I'm hoping to make it really brief. The reality is that it's a topic that could take us a whole day just to discuss it, but I've tried to make it very brief and expect that during the discussion stage or the question stage, we'll hear a number of suggestions that will help us enhance coverage of pensions for the non-wage sector in Africa. A little introduction, then actuaries already know, but I'll just, for the purpose of this lecture, make some remarks about the relevance of pensions. Then I'll talk about the informal sector. Then some regulatory issues and challenges that we face. Then talk about the way forward, and then I will conclude. Now, the realization is that all modern societies must address the issue of looking after the elderly. So the provision of pensions is of fundamental economic and social importance due to its role in providing retirement income security. Quite obviously, pensions provide a means for reducing or minimizing old age poverty. In traditional Africa, the extended family and the community, to a large extent, took the responsibility to support people in that category. But in recent times, it has come under extreme pressure due to urbanization, due to industrialization, and due to migration. So that pension schemes have now become a necessary substitute as an old age income security for all. Why are pensions relevant? This is not a question I should ask actuaries. They know that too well. But I'll just make a few remarks just for the purpose of my presentation. Pension funds essentially collect retirement savings from workers and their employers and invest these monies in a wide range of assets. The pension funds are often referred to as patient funds due to the long-term nature of their liabilities and represent a potentially major source of long-term financing. Now, because of their immense size, pension funds' investment decisions have a major influence on financial markets, and the funds are often a source of large accumulation of funds for potential social and economic development. The institution that I work with is Ghana's National Pensions Regulatory Authority, and we are members of the International Organization of Pension Supervisors. The relevant statistics that we got from IOPS, or the International Organization of Pension Supervisors, indicates that at the end of the year 2020, private pension fund assets were in excess of 35 trillion US dollars. Indeed, that increased from 32 trillion US dollars in 2019. Just to buttress the point that I put across, saying that pension funds grew into very huge funds and can drive economic development. From the latest figures that we receive, in some countries, the size of the private pension fund assets is in excess of 200% of their GDP. If you take a country like Netherlands had 2.06 trillion US dollars in private pension fund assets, and that represents 210% of their GDP. Australia had 1.754 trillion US dollars in private pension fund assets, representing 121.8% of GDP. John, you are here, so let me mention your country. The US had 20.03 trillion US dollars in private pension fund assets, representing 95.8% of their GDP. That shows the extent to which, well, if there are those from UK, I could mention that as well. UK had 3.241 trillion US dollars in pension fund assets, representing 149.1% of their GDP. That shows the extent to which private pension funds or funded pension schemes can be used to drive and to support economic development. A phenomenon that has occurred in our part of the world, next slide please, is what we refer to as the informal sector of our active workforce. These are the non-wage sectors of our active workforce in our part of the world. And it's a phenomenon in most of the developing countries. Our economists tell us that as one's economy grows, it absorbs the informal sector. I'm not too sure whether that proposition works in our part of the world. In spite of economic growth that we see, the informal sector keeps expanding. What is the informal sector? The informal sector, as I've said earlier, plays a role in world economies as it creates jobs, boosts entrepreneurial activity, reduces unemployment, alleviates poverty, and contributes to economic growth. What are some of their characteristics? Informal sector workers have this kind of characteristics. They have that continuous change of jobs. They also have that temporary nature of their employment contracts. They often live in remote rural areas or urban slums, and they are often illiterate and unfamiliar with the concept of pensions. And they have little experience of dealing with formal financial institutions. It is estimated that, next slide please, in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, for instance, in excess of 80% of the active labor force is employed in this sector. Most of them are not covered by pension arrangements due often to their low incomes, poor savings culture, and perhaps a saving culture that favors workers in the formal sector. There is often inadequate governmental support as well. What are some of the regulatory issues that we could mention? Before I talk about that in more detail, I know the actuaries already know, but then for the purpose of my presentation, let me say a few things. Regulation, essentially, is the establishment of specific rules and standards and supervision as a process of implementing the system and enforcing compliance with the rules of that system. Essentially, pensions regulation involves the oversight over pension institutions, enforcement and promotion of compliance with rules relating to the structure and operation of pension schemes with the goal of promoting a well-functioning pensions sector. The main objective of pension regulation is to focus on protecting the interests of pension scheme members and beneficiaries and promoting the stability, security, and good governance of the pension schemes. Of course, pension regulation is necessary to protect against the numerous risks pension schemes are exposed to due to the nature of pension products, such as the following. Pension contracts are long-term in nature. There may be compulsion as a way of overcoming the individual's myopia. Coverage is over a wide social and economic range of the population. There are low risk tolerance of contributors and beneficiaries. Also, complexity of the pension products, which may involve tax issues, assumption over future salaries, longevity, valuation of assets and liabilities, something that the actuaries do best. There may be limited competition and choice. Then their potential impacts on financial markets and economic stability give their large and increasing size. Then, of course, increased complexity and sophistication of financial crimes. How do we deal with all this that I've talked about earlier? In Africa, the issue of financial literacy and pensions literacy in particular still haunts us. As a way forward, therefore, we require very extensive and intensive public education. We also need to create appropriate awareness and be able to market the kind of products that we have that will reach out to that sector. Quite importantly, issues relating also to consumer protection are entirely relevant. Portability issues, equally very important, but it must be inexpensive. Quite importantly, state guarantees must be given to contributors to give them that comfort. There may be the need to give the appropriate monetary incentives for people to participate in this kind of products. And then the most important thing, as I've said earlier, one characteristic of workers in that sector is that they generally earn very low incomes. Therefore, to encourage them to participate actively in any of these pension schemes will require encouraging them to contribute small but frequent amounts. Quite importantly is the professional management of the funds that accrue. Capacity building is also an issue. Then finally, the use of electronic platforms for premium or contribution mobilization. I will conclude. In conclusion, I would say that promotion and increased efforts at informal sector workers' coverage is a necessity and important, particularly for the developing countries, if ever we are to lift ourselves out of poverty. Then two, expanded coverage of the informal sector is expected to potentially make available a large pool of long-term funds for investment in the economy, and consequently lead to national economic development. Ghana embarked on pensions reform, whose implementation began just a little over 10 years ago. Funds that have accrued to the private pension schemes are already close to about 10% of GDP. So if we are able to extend coverage to the excess of 80% of the active workforce to also make some contribution, we may not need any significant foreign assistance to develop. Let me also add that effective regulation and supervision of pension funds is becoming ever more important and even more complex. And every pension regulator must be appropriately and adequately resourced in a part of the world to carry out its mandate effectively. Then, there's the need for a congenial investment environment which must be created by policymakers to make long-term investment of pension funds attractive and then also thrive. Mr. Chairman, I will say thank you for your attention. I'll prefer to take as many questions as possible. 2 questions, and I'll respond to them. Mr. John Roberts, Professor Nketia, let me hear you.
Okay, I need a mic. Quickly,
yeah.
Do you think we are using the right channels to reach this informal sector? We've known for years that these people save, and they save through the Susu people. And they're able to convince them to save on a weekly basis. So why do we send people like me, you, and others who think we are educated, and we cannot talk to these people and let them give their money to us? So if I may suggest, let's use the Susu people to try to get to them. We don't play on the same levels, you know.
Excellent. That's a useful suggestion. For those of us who may not be quite familiar with our systems here, what Professor Francis Nketia said was that we have a system by which people go around and mobilize daily contributions from people who work in the informal sector. And at the end of the month, they give back those monies to them, less a day's contribution. It has worked for so long in our part of the world. What it's suggesting is, why don't we look at that as a model by which we can refine it and let that support the pensions sector? The interesting thing is that, yes, that system has been with us for quite some time. But the sad part of it is that there have been huge fraudulent cases concerning that sector because it is not regulated. It is not regulated. And a lot of challenges have come up. From my regulatory office, what we've been able to encourage a number of the private pension funds to do, or the private pensions companies to do, is to latch on to the mobile money platform. And it looks like we seem to be making a lot of headway. 3 companies have delved into that sector and appears to be working. People in that sector earn daily incomes. So at the end of the day, if he can transmit 5 Ghana cedis, our currency is called a cedi, he does that and it goes directly into a personal pension custody account. He gets an immediate feedback that the money has been received, credited to your account, and this is your balance. It's actually helping in creating a lot of transparency and minimizing fraud in that aspect of contribution mobilization. And indeed, cost-wise, it's been quite efficient. What my office or the regulator's office is trying to do is to find out how we can collaborate with the telecommunications companies to take off charges relating to pension contribution transfers. We are yet to conclude on that, but we're making some serious efforts to see if the telecoms companies who handle this mobile money business could collaborate with us and encourage that, if possible, even as corporate social responsibility, then I'm sure that we could make some headway. And already, a lot of funds have been mobilized as a result of that. So, Prof, we take note of your advice. We even want to improve upon it by using electronic means. That probably will make things far better than the traditional ones that we've hung on for so many years.
And then with time, they migrated to sending in checks on monthly basis.
Right.
So you're going back to the fundamentals. And if you do it right, you will get there one day.
We acknowledge that. We take note. Thank you. John, I can't wait to hear from you. John Robinson, President of the SOA.
1, 2.
Okay.
I would also squeeze in a question, if I may. Thank you, Dr. Van D, for this presentation on an important topic. There are few moments that can be more heart-wrenching than to get to your retirement and realize that you've not saved enough to last for the rest of your life. You mentioned financial literacy, the importance of financial literacy. And I believe that sometimes when we get to educating people about their finances, it's normally too late. The Ghanaian student studies so many things that are not too practical, but I think financial literacy is so important that it can be woven at a very early stage of the student's experience, maybe as early as grade 3, right? So what are we doing to make sure that the Ghanaian is being taught ways to think about all the ways he or she can maintain his or her financial security for the rest of his life?
Thank you so much. This has been discussed at length at various forums. Happily, at the most senior levels, we have what we call a Financial Stability Council that meets regularly to examine the financial health and status of the Ghanaian financial service industry. And that comprises the 4 financial regulators, the banks, governor represents the central bank on that council. The insurance commissioner represents the insurance industry on that council. Then the pensions regulator does that. And then the securities industry head also does that. We've brought this issue up just as you've put it across several times. Of course, the obvious thing is that it's not only pensions that's important, but the whole spans beyond just the pension sector. At the very basic school level, the kids should be introduced to what it means so far as securities is concerned, insurance is concerned, pensions is concerned, banking is concerned, once they have that knowledge, it follows them through life. So it's just an excellent proposition that you've put across, which is under consideration. And my hope is that it goes beyond just the talk, but we walk the talk, make it real and practical. Take a small sample, Ghanaians, even who are probably highly educated, even to the college level, ask them basic questions about the financial service industry, probably be surprised. And it's so peculiar to Ghana. I read a document that in almighty US, there was a survey that was done, and a very significant portion of those sampled could not differentiate between what a bond and then equity or listed stock is. Huge in such an advanced country. So it's not just peculiar to the developing country environments. In the more advanced countries, they also have that problem. Of course, ours is a bit more acute. But as you rightly said, we should look at it from the very fundamental stage and hope that gradually it filters up to adulthood. So that's a good suggestion. We'll take that. Right. 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 Yes, John.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, you've asked my views. I'm listening to you keenly in the audience here because you have identified as best you can, and certainly you know your culture best, what the challenges are, and I found Francis's response quite interesting because it seems to me that the solutions are going to be easier to implement the more they are related to the culture in the particular situation that you're trying to solve. And so I would just encourage you to continue down that path and leverage the culture that already exists in developing your solutions.
I will encourage him to form a Susu company that will assist us. Thank you. Yes, President, yeah.
Yes, this one, just to press a little, on your state guarantees, how far are you as a regulator or regulatory body from looking at returns? The fund managers have gotten away with returns. Do you have a cap? Do you have a cap for returns, especially when you come to pensions, investments, and all that? Because you are going to a sector that would always look at savings, the component, and say that how much returns am I getting on it? Now, if the market is not good, how do you explain to such community? So I want to see how far we are from.
Thank you for that question. Happily, you're an actuary, so I'm sure you understand clearly the relationship between risks and return. In my presentation, I mentioned that in general, contributors to pension schemes are risk adverse. Indeed, if you look at the National Pensions Act of Ghana, the emphasis is on safety of the funds. For the private pension schemes, to avoid an undue exposure to risks, the law even specifies the kind of assets that you can invest the private pension funds in. What are some of them? Government securities, central bank securities, collective investment schemes, listed equities, corporate bonds for companies that are listed on the stock exchange, amongst others, bank securities, and so on. Just to be sure that people do not gamble with pension fund assets. Of course, for us as regulators, as part of the process of licensing the schemes to run, we request for an investment policy that will guide your handling of the assets that accrue to the pension scheme. And we are very strict about that. I don't want to share a funny story, but maybe because you asked, I could just share that experience. There was this man in his company who literally harassed our office in getting a license to operate a private pensions company. To our surprise, after he got the license, barely 2 weeks and a few days, he came back asking that he was no longer interested in running the private pensions business. We were pretty surprised. What could be your reason why you are no longer interested? He said he thought that. He said already he's in the fish farming business, right? Which was so profitable. His assumption was that when his company came up with schemes, personal pensions, and then people enrolled on it, he was going to use the contributions in fish farming. And he was told that he risked going to jail the next minute if he attempted to do that. You cannot invest people's pension savings into fish farming, no matter how profitable it is. So that ended the story. He surrendered the license. The point that I'm trying to make is that you obviously would not want to put people's future survival at the tail end of their life into that kind of risk. You want to be extra cautious about how you invested their funds. Return may be useful. It may even be important. But it comes with the relevant risks. So at the end of it all, happily you're an actuary, so you understand. The principles that guide investment of pension funds, we strictly adhere to them. Safety of the funds, appropriate diversification, social utility for some of these investments, if need be, and so on. We look at all those principles in approving the investment policies that guide investment of the pension funds. And we strictly monitor them to make sure that they are doing well. So you observe that within 10 years, the private pension funds have done pretty wonderfully because of the strict regulation that we enforce on them. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Amate Bondi, for your intuitive presentation. 2 quick announcements. All those who have paid or are interested in taking part in the Cape Coast tour should confirm their participation at the registration desk. We shall have lunch at the Sankofa restaurant and be back at 2:30.